When I was told that in that vision, like, you have to go back or you're going to keep getting sick. I'm like, what does that mean? You know, so I woke up one day, I'm like, okay, well, I guess I better go back then.
Tansei, hello, and welcome to the Matriarch Movement podcast. I'm your host, Shayla Oulette Stonechild, and I'm super excited to have Santee Siouxx here with me today. She is from Dakota Teepee First Nation, and she does many things. She's a very talented jingle dress dancer. She's also an advocate for Indigenous rights and uses her platform to raise awareness about reconciliation, but also about the truth of who she is and where she comes from. And you're also a team with your daughter Alana, right? And she's a fancy dancer, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, so you may follow her on social media. If you don't already, I suggest you do. So thank you so much, Santee, for showing up here. If there's anything that I forgot in the introduction, now's your chance.
Hamitakio pe petukinde chante ma washte chiu zapiedo Santee Siouxx makio ya. Ina wikomakonga ate Dakota Teepee First Nation and Toronto Edward T. Peter Mayaye, just so happy to be here. Thank you for having me, Shayla, on your show. Just being a part of it. It's just an amazing movement that you're working towards. And what I said in my language is that my heart is really happy to be here. And hello, everyone. And I honored my mother. She's from Wikwemekong. And also I honored my father. He's from Dakota Teepee. And I said that I currently live in my home away from home right now here in Toronto.
How long have you been in Toronto?
Right now, like 7 years.
7 years. Okay, so where did you grow up?
I grew up on the res. My childhood was very different than the regular Canadian, non-Indigenous Canadian childhood. Because for me, when we grew up in Dakota Teepee, I didn't know that we were considered refugees of Canada for the Dakotas due to the Dakota War. And so that's where my ancestors come from. And when I didn't even know my father and mother, they were Indian residential school survivors. And so my father, when we were born, what I felt like was a cultural resurgence was his passion for us. What I mean by that is that my childhood school was a house. It was a house on a tiny little reserve. Our reserve is so small, surrounded by farmland. And I didn't understand why we had to go to school in a little yellow house, which is still there today, by the way. And why did the kids in town get to go to nice buildings? They had big gymnasiums. We were in a house and some trailers when we were over capacity we had to get trailers. And I just didn't understand that as a young child. Another part of my childhood was growing up is that there was a mushroom plant right across from our school, and it would get so bad that we would have to cancel school. And a mushroom plant, what that is if you're aware of that, they use manure to grow mushrooms. And the pollution from that manure gets so bad, it smelled like manure, like really, really bad manure. And it gave a lot of the kids in Dakota Teepee asthma. And so we would have protests as children for the environment that, this is not good for our community and the people, we're getting sick. Little too did I know that Canada has so much Indigenous heroes that did things like this. Little to my knowledge, my father built that school quickly and brought a house in quickly to keep us from Indian residential schools. He saved so many children from attending those Indian residential schools that I wasn't even aware of. And so for me, he's a hereditary chief. Currently, to this day, he's 70 years old, still fighting for his people. Still doing this kind of work, still fighting for land claims and getting justice systems in place for our people. And so he's still doing this work. And to me, like, there's so many Indigenous leaders that are out there that we're unaware of that have stories like this. And I really think that we need to start talking about these stories. There's so many Indigenous heroism out there that deserve this kind of knowledge and recognition that so many of us are like unaware of. And for me, that is what I'm so grateful for. But for so many Indigenous people in their childhoods, they don't realize that because it wasn't taught in our education system. Like, I didn't even know my mom was a day school survivor until like 3 years ago. and everything made sense to me, where her rage came from, her anger, her anxiety, and everything like that. Because for her, a lot of our parents don't know how to heal yet from those pains that came from those schools in that era. And so a lot of our parents today, they're still learning how to heal from the pain. And I feel like we are in this generation of taking that pain and asking ourselves, like, what can we do with it, right? What can we do with this pain to make it beautiful? And when we understand our history and our cultural upbringing and what our parents tried to do for us that came from Indian residential school system, I really think that helps us be who we are today, and acknowledging that.
What is your dad's name?
My dad's name is Dennis.
And your mom's name?
Verna.
Okay. I'm like, I just want to bring their life into this conversation, because now I know why you are such a strong advocate. It's really because your parents paved the way. And I think oftentimes for me, even, my dad was a really strong advocate for Indigenous rights. Despite him being in the prison system, he would often advocate for issues, writing to different magazines and sending it out. And even though he was in a system that really tried to suppress and deny his voice. And I think at the same time, I really hold high respect and a high honor to be given the chance to use my voice in ways that our parents were never allowed, or given the opportunity, or our grandparents were never allowed. They were really denied that. They were killed for it. Just being here and being with you right now and actually having a chance to have platforms to advocate for these things, like that is like the revolution in itself. And so when you are advocating for certain things on your platform, what do you feel really strongly about, and what do you see hope change within Canada and within the system here itself?
You know, part of that upbringing and why I bring up my childhood, going to that school across from a mushroom plant, I almost died at 13 because I had almost a severe asthma attack due to the pollution. And from there, when you experience death so closely, and then a lot of it has to do with the violence of colonialism. Little later, that school did end up closing down, thankfully, but it was due to, the economic downfall of the manure and mushroom plants. But unfortunately, that's what it took. It didn't take our voices being heard. It didn't take us, protect the kids, and every child matters wasn't a thing back then. And so for me, how I implement that, it just allowed me to be more grateful for life and tell my story in my childhood. And that's just one small part of it.
Yeah.
There's so much darkness that our communities have to come through. For me, like dance, I almost gave up dancing a few times because of the trauma, the intergenerational impacts of alcoholism that our community suffers with, and all those darknesses that so many of our communities face with the negativity from colonialism, right? And so right now we're in the surge of how do we come up with solutions, which is the most major thing that we need to look at from my perspective is we need to figure out how to help others, other women, other Indigenous men and women, how they can come out of that darkness too. And so for me, when I lost my brother due to alcoholism and drinking and driving, it was really hard for me to get back into dancing because we came from a big powwow family. We were always on the trail. And so losing him, he was a championship grass dancer. And, my brothers, they were championships. And we all worked really hard to, work our gifts of dancing. And so losing him at 10 years old was really hard. I didn't know I carried that grief for a very long time. And so I had to go back to ceremony to remove the grief from my body in order for me to continue dancing on. And so when my daughter was born, I fortunately, I tried to get back into dancing from 10 years old all the way to 19. It was very difficult because of the grief with the family. Because when you lose a family member that young, it's really hard to, especially when your family doesn't know how to deal with grief. And so many of our communities are like that. We just kind of go into survivor mode. And then we don't really take the time to understand how to heal our bodies, our mind, our spirit, and everything, and how that impacts us to be able to even get out there and dance again. And so for me, I had to go on that journey. And it was when my daughter was born, I went to go get her name. And when I went to go get her name, we were told that we were given that gift to dancing. And I remember when my brother passed on, the message I received from him was continue to dance on, not only for your family, not only for your people, not only for your nation, but for Creator. Because we, as Indigenous people, we were able, despite all of the legal laws and being criminalized for our culture and our beauty, we kept the beauty of our dances, our song, our culture, our languages. And so from that darkness that I had to go through as a young child, I saw the beauty in it. And I saw the significance of, I have to dance on for Creator. And so, as you know, powwows, they can be really competitive, and people get really insecure dancing off beat and not stopping on time, and like, oh, I don't know if my regalia looks pretty enough because everyone looks so fancy. And these regalias, they take time, they take money, they take all of a lot for them, like for a dancer to put into it. And so my message to anyone else who wants to get into dancing, don't worry about that stuff. Don't worry about it. Practice. Remember while you're doing it in your chante, your heart, your heart is that all that darkness we overcame and we still able to dance. And if you feel that gift in your spirit, pursue it, listen to it. You're dancing for Creator, because whether I like to say it or not, Indigenous people we are Creator's favorite. And so remember that we're beautiful. We have beautiful songs still, despite all that trauma, despite all that darkness. And that's why I kind of shared just a small part of like what our family had to come out of in order for us to be here today. And for me, when I got that message when my daughter was given her name, that we're both given that gift through dance, through song, through ceremony, it just made me forget the past and let it all go, and not worry about not being good enough to be out there and dancing, and just do it for Creator, because Creator allowed us to express our creativity. Creator allowed us to use our voice, because you mentioned your dad there. Our parents, that generation is a generation of silence. And I think that's why I still don't know my dad's story in Indian residential school. And I feel like he didn't want to tell us that because it brought shame to the family. And I feel like he just threw us in ceremony, threw us in dancing as a powwow family, and he didn't want us to carry that shame and guilt of the Indian residential school system, and he wanted us to be proud of our songs, our dances, and our cultures, right? And I think that's why I don't really know his story to this day, or my mother's, because they don't want us to carry that shame. They want us to be proud of who we are.
Yeah. And I think like that's their story, and they're going to share like how they feel called to share, and maybe not sharing it is like that feels more in alignment with what they need. But I love that you bring up connection to Creator. And I feel like even if you dance or if you don't dance, I feel like for me, myself, I call on Creator when I'm writing, when I'm acting, before I'm speaking. It's that connection to source. And I can imagine as you're dancing, it's a way of channeling that connection to the divine, that connection to Creator, that connection to something bigger than just ourselves. And so for those that are listening that may have never gone to a powwow or may have never tried dancing, how would you explain like what the jingle dress dance is, and what's the historical context behind that specific dance?
Right. So we just want to acknowledge that the jingle dress, they say it comes from a few different places, but from my knowledge, it came from the Mille Lacs tribes of the Ojibwe near the Great Lakes region. I heard like it also came from the Whitefish Bay area and region, and it came from a grandfather's vision when his granddaughter fell ill. And it's a healing dress, right? And to me, I just posted a video recently when the jingle dress dancers came in. And when you really listen to the jingle dress when they come in, it almost sounds like a rattle. And so he was given specific instructions for his granddaughter how to make that dress with the cones. And for the longest time as a young girl, when I first saw the dress, I was like, why does it have all those cones on it for? And it's because of the sound. And for me, in my perspective, I feel like it's very close to the rattle.
It is.
And the rattles, they're healing. And I feel like he was given those specific instructions because that noise when you dance, that's what brings the healing. And that's why I do the dance.
I remember reading about this story now actually online, and he had a vision because he went to bed, right? And then it came to him in a dream.
And our visions are very strong. And, when you do dream and you do get a vision, it's a very real thing.
So that's what I was going to say next is like Matriarch Movement actually came to me in a dream. And so now I'm just starting to realize the significance of our dream world. Have you personally tapped into like your dream state at all? Yeah.
Oh, yes. But it took me a long time to get where I am today. I just didn't wake up and all these amazing things have happened to me. It took a lot to find who I am because of that darkness we had to go through. It made me afraid of who I was. And when I had dreams, I couldn't interpret them the way I can now. And one significant dream I had, which was kind of like, was that, you need to go back to your ceremonies. And because I went through all this darkness and trauma, I never felt good enough to go back to my ceremonies. And I feel like so many Indigenous young people feel that way too. Even our elders who are disconnected and are feeling really lost. I feel like a lot of them don't feel like they're good enough, but that's not true. And I just want them, I want them to know that you have every right to be in your ceremonies. And to me, when I finally decided to go back to our Sundance, which is like one of the oldest and most toughest ceremonies in Turtle Island. You go 4 days without no food or water, and you dance in a circle with the tree of life and pray to the sun all day. And to me, that is there's nothing more that can teach you humility than going without water that long and teach you a certain kind of kindness and humility and have compassion for others. And so I never felt good enough for that ceremony for a very long time. And so when I was told that in that vision, like, you have to go back or you're going to keep getting sick. I'm like, what does that mean? So I woke up one day, I'm like, okay, well, I guess I better go back then. And no questions, no doubting what that dream meant. I just went to ceremony and threw myself in there. And I said, I asked the elders, please be compassionate towards me. This is my first year. And from those 4 years of completing, I just finished my 4th year this year. And it's life-changing. It brings you so much healing and spiritual grounding of who you are. And people don't really tell you when we come here as spirits what we are really here for. And those 4 years really taught me how to be grounded spiritually within my dreams, within myself, and finding out who I am. And I didn't realize I was always scared of who I was. And I feel like so many of our young Indigenous people feel that way as well, because nobody's teaching them how to heal through the trauma and how to come up through the darkness, and they don't feel good enough, or they're not shown kindness, and a lot of them are still looking for love from their parents that they'll never get. And so I want them to know, like, it's just like this for many of our Indigenous kids. They're still looking for love from mom and dad, and because of the Indian residential school era, it took away the love from a lot of our children. And so as you go through this, as you grow up, I just want them to know that you have to cut ties with mom and dad if you're not getting that love, and to be able to follow your dreams, listen to them, because it's very real. Like, your dreams are very real. They give you messages, and that's wisdom coming in from the other side, because your ancestors are always with you. You're not alone. A lot of these things that has happened, they happen for a reason. Like one of my uncle says, a spirit moves you. You feel pull, right? You feel a pull. That's not by accident. That's happening for a reason, right? And so that's when I went to ceremony, and I'm like, I'm going to leave my ego. I'm going to leave everything. I'm just going to get in there, and I'm just going to learn. And, I want to encourage our young people and next generation to do that. If you feel called to it, go to it. Don't be afraid. So I was always afraid. From those 4 years and then making that commitment to Creator, you have to give up the drugs and alcohol. And nobody tells our young people, what does that mean to give up drugs and alcohol? Like, for one, it will spiritually ground you. Well, what is spiritually grounding? That is you're 100% aware of your surroundings, what you say, what you think, what you feel. For the longest time, I didn't have a connection to my gut feeling, my intuition. I had a lot of grief I needed to get rid of. And so I walked around with so much grief and anxiety because of what I had to heal from. And so many of our people are kind of like that, because nobody's teaching them how to heal themselves. And I want people to know we have our medicines, we have our ceremonies, we have those things, we have those tools. And those tools were given to us by Creator to keep us strong. When people say, keep your mind strong, well, how do you do that, right? Mm-hmm. You could just say so much, Well, when you keep your mind strong, you're using these tools. For us, we use a chanupa. It's a sacred pipe. It brings us balance within our masculine and feminine energy, right? Because a lot of people don't know this, but we have one side of our body, the liver side, that represents your mother, your woman's side, and your right side is your father. Even when you get out of bed, you roll out of bed on one side, they say that's like your warrior side. Well, today I don't want to feel like a warrior. You go out of this side of the bed, or today I want to be more into like my feminine side. So you roll out of that side of bed. Like we had those things, like we knew those things, Indigenous people, because Indigenous people were always one step ahead with our medicines and those tools that I talked about. And so that is your connection to Creator. It's almost like a Wi-Fi signal. And so why do you think it was taken away so violently? That was our direct connection to Creator. Our ceremonies, our sweat lodges. Why do men go to sweat lodges? Why do women go to sweat lodges? It's because it's to clean off the emotional turmoil of being a human being. That's why they're there. And so I didn't have any understanding of this the way I do now, and how I could help our people understand this without giving the specific instructions, right? Because you only could say so much out of respect, because what our ceremonies are, it's almost like going to the doctor. And you don't want to take pictures and videos of going to the doctor, do you? So no. that's why you have to respect the medicines, respect the ceremony, and that's why we don't take video camera, and we acknowledge that, right? I know that was a long question about dreams, but that is all tied into each other. It's like, remember that's like your strong Wi-Fi connection or your antenna to Creator. Like me and my brother, we joke to each other when we have a hard time. We'll be like, oh, just pick up the phone and use your pipe and call Creator. Well, in Dakota, we say Tunkashala. And so, that's your connection that we're all coming back to, right? I think it's a beautiful thing. And I really think more people need to believe in it, because like I said before in a talk I did with youth, they took a lot of our medicine people and deemed them as insane. And so when they took them away, our communities became weak. And so now a lot of our medicine people are slowly coming out of the woodworks, because they instilled that fear that we're going to deem you insane. And they took them to insane asylums, and they have massive unmarked graves there too. And they have, they created that fear. They tortured them. They did multiple experiences in our medicine people and our spiritual people. And this is like the history that they don't teach us about. But I feel like we need to talk about it more, because this is what makes us a better, more exclusive, just equality society. When we learn the true history, we talk about our healing, we talk about our pain, and we talk about where we want to go forward. And there's so much beauty into that.
Yeah. And I think, like you had mentioned earlier, I think Indigenous people, we have the framework, we have the tools for our own healing. I think sometimes it is very challenging to stay rooted in who you are. And like you're saying, for me, sometimes when I was younger, and even now, I don't know if it's my intuition or if it's my gut feeling, if I'm being swayed or pulled in through social media, if I'm being pulled in by, if I want to stay sober, if I'm being pulled in by the responsibilities of, an outside source. So I think like sometimes you're unsure if that's really your intuition, or maybe it's someone else's, or let's say also toxic relationships. I feel like as
got something to say about that,
right? So I'm like, I don't know. Sometimes I'm like, where is my voice in all of the noise? But I think what brings you back to it is, like you're saying, that connection to the ceremony, that connection to prayer, that connection to, for me, it's yoga, that connection to some modality that helps you release other people's things.
That's what I was going to say about drugs and alcohol, and why our ceremonies, when you have to let it go, because I was going to talk again about life. So when we come here to Earth, we make an agreement with Creator. We already know what are the challenges we're going to deal with and what kind of life we're going to have, and we make that commitment. And so when drugs and alcohol come into the picture, it stops us from that commitment of being spiritually grounded. It doesn't allow you to be spiritually grounded. And I know a lot of people who smoke weed are not going to like me saying this, but that is not a good drug for our people. And it has long-term side effects, and we don't believe in it in Indigenous, our ceremonies. Because why? Drugs and alcohol, it manipulates the healing process. It manipulates the medicines you are using. And when you use the medicines and you bring alcohol and drugs in the picture, the medicines is a strong spirit in itself. And what I mean by medicines is like the sage, the tobacco, the cedar, the things we use for our healing modalities. That medicine is a spirit in itself, and it has strong healing remedies. And so when you mix drugs and alcohol into it, you're only slowing down your healing process, right? And it's manipulating it. And so when we come here down through earth, we come here to have spiritual development. And what is spiritual development? It's trying to help you reach the ultimate goal of happiness. And, drugs and alcohol, it slows down that spiritual development. And it allows a lot of negativity into your life. You open doors to a lot of negativity. And I wish somebody told me this as a youth. I wish somebody helped me understand it. And what we've known as Indigenous people is that from the ages of 12 to 19, our people are their most vulnerable. And so back then, you would see them with these big bandolier bags, these medicine bags, because they were carrying medicine in them to protect them from, the negativities of the world. Right? And because we knew that they didn't like our young people, we would protect them with those medicines and keep them away from drugs and alcohol. Because once they open the door to drugs and alcohol, those young people have so much beautiful gifts that's going to stop them from accessing those gifts. And because it, regardless of how to say it, it makes that other negative energy mad. That we are such a beautiful people and we have these amazing gifts to share with the world. So that is why drugs and alcohol is important to not have in our ceremonies, and why we give it up for our commitment to Creator. It's about your spiritual development here on earth, and it's about you reaching that ultimate goal of happiness when you leave here.
And I think it's also about having strong boundaries. Because for me, like, for example, I've been pretty much sober like this whole year. But the people that I allowed in my life through not having boundaries that were committing harm against me, they were still stuck in those cycles of substance abuse. And so for me, because I'm an empath, I just want to take care of everybody. But at some point, you need to realize that these people having access to you is actually doing more harm than good. And so I think it's also having boundaries, but also recognizing people are where they're at, and maybe just distancing yourself from that. Because I've also thought about how maybe these darker forces are trying to get to us through different relationships and through different people. And so those relationships are almost like a test in your life if you're going to stay connected to your path, or if you're going to go on to a path that's distorted or maybe not the best for you. And so that's what I'm learning right now is okay, how do I stay connected to my purpose and my path, but also treat people with respect, but keep them at a distance,
Well, there's a huge thing that I learned in growing up is like attracts alike. So what does that mean? It means that when you walk around with all this anger, grief, and everything like that, and darkness, you're only going to attract people like that. And so when you go through the healing process, you use the sacred medicines and the modalities that we had for thousands of years since time immemorial, and you do this process of healing, you're going to spiritually develop. You're going to get at another level of healing where you do know your boundaries. Like I said, self-awareness, right? And so it all ties together. Whether we like it or not, we are like a human species. And to say that when we heal ourselves, right, and when it comes to relationships, you will change the entire scent of your body. And so a negative man or a negative woman could literally pick up that scent in you, and you attracted each other. And so that's why when we're in bad relationships, like attracts alike. Just like the Johnny Depp and Amber Heard case, right? they attracted each other because they'd never done their healing.
Right.
And so that's why it's so important when you heal yourself. You don't go jumping into a relationship right away until you're 100% sure. And when you go through that process, you'll eventually attract someone because the whole anatomy of your body changes. Everything shifts. And you will feel that, and you become balanced, you become self-aware, you become, like I said, spiritually developed. And you will know you will know.
Yeah, I think it comes to being in right relationship to yourself. Yeah.
You got to love yourself first.
You got to love yourself.
I didn't understand what that meant for a long time. And then they're like, and then I finally get it. Yeah, I love that person, but I also love me more.
Yeah, no, exactly. And for you, having gone through Sundance and now having gone through, I guess, like creating and cultivating a life that's built around self-awareness and self-love, what do you hope to start to see manifest for Indigenous futures, for our future as Indigenous people?
I feel like to have a more equality and just society, I feel like we need to see more representation in the education sector, the media, entertainment, the economic sector, and like entrepreneurship, right? And there's the justice legal system, healthcare systems, the social services, governments and leadership, environmental stewardship. I would love to see more representation in these areas. And I feel like this is so important because Indigenous people for the last 500 years had so much to contribute.
And I think you're slowly starting to see a shift now. Like I noticed that you've recently partnered with, who is it? The Raptors? Is it the Raptors?
Argos? Yeah.
I'm new to Toronto.
Oh, no, Toronto Raptors. Yeah, no,
Raptors.
They invited us for Indigenous Exclusion Night. And then the Argos, they invited us to dance and perform for their Indigenous night. And to me, these partnerships that I have, they're important because it shows the beauty and the beauty of our culture, and it exposes it to people because there's so many kids in there. It's the first time they've ever saw Indigenous people, especially dancing and performing. But for me, like when it comes to partnerships, it's your values that matter. Does it suit your values of who you are and how you want to tell the truth in in your stories, right? And so I always stick to that, my morals and my values. But also, we have to remember truth and reconciliation is not just Indigenous. It's not just our job. It requires the hard work of non-Indigenous people.
I think I already know kind of where you're going with this, but what would you advise non-Indigenous people do to support in terms of creating that kinship, creating that relationship with each other?
Like what they can do to contribute to reconciliation?
Yeah.
Well, a lot of it has to do with education, teaching the true history. Again, like when we know our true history, it allows us to have better leadership. It allows us to have good structure in our school systems. For the longest time, they weren't teaching our history in the educational curriculum. Like for me, right? I come from the Santee Siouxx, which was like a huge part of Canada and the United States. Where did that history go? We don't even know about it. They said 0.1% knows about it in USA, who the Santee Siouxx is, which represents the 7 council fires of the Dakota, Lakota, and the Nakotas, right? They don't even teach that in our school of who these beautiful, amazing, strong singers were. They just completely wiped us out, And so that's what I mean. Like we need to start bringing that history of who were the Cree, who were the Ojibwe, where did these people come from, who were before the fur trade, and how did these relationships come about. They teach in grade 10 and 11 about the war, then they teach more about the treaties. Why aren't we teaching the treaties before the World War I and II? And so to me, that's what we need to start bringing back in the education curriculum, because there's so much beauty and knowledge we can learn from that. And it like I said, it requires the hard work of non-Indigenous Canadians to learn that and to have that shift in narrative. For me, I would like to learn the history of the people who were here prior to colonization. I feel like that needs to be like taught in kindergarten all the way up.
Yeah, and across like all of Canada, across Turtle Island, getting to know like whose land you are on essentially and who was there before you.
I think I went to go speak at this school with the grade kids. I think it was grade 3. And we were talking about Orange Shirt Day, and I got a question from a young boy. He's like, why did they hate Indigenous kids so much? And that really stuck with me. I was like, this little kid even sees it. And then I told him, it's because it's the people in power. It's the society, us, that we can work together to make the laws that need to get changed. And that's what happened. The laws changed because the society did not agree to what was happening to these Indigenous kids and what's still happening to Indigenous kids, right? Because you have to remember, like 40% of those calls to action are legacies. They are still ongoing today. And so that's what I explained to him. It's the people in power. So when you run for government and leadership, you can be a better leader for us.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I would love to see more Indigenous people within leadership as well. And also
awesome.
like dismantling our love for, I think, power and control. I think like what I'm recognizing is like the people in power want to stay in power. And we're advocating for more of our Indigenous voices within those places of power. And so at some point there has to be like, I don't know, either like you get like land back, like you give back. I don't know.
Well, you have to remember generosity is such an important thing when it comes to Indigenous people. That's why we have giveaway ceremonies and everything like that, because we believe in that. In our culture, we have this word called unchimalaya. And that means when you help me, I'm asking Creator to help you 4 times. Is great. Like if your tire blows out on this side of the street, and I say unchimalaya, and that means like our language is so powerful. It means so many more things than just a couple of words, and so it means that when you help me fix my tire, I asked Creator to bless you 4 times is great, and that's why we give away, right? We have so much. It's important to give back, and. And leaders, and they want to hold all this power and everything, they probably just make themselves sick in the end.
Well, that's really what comes down to. You create like more resistance, and then you actually do more harm to yourself than good. But I know, speaking of like power, you and your daughter are so powerful when it comes to your dances and when it comes to how you speak and advocate for Indigenous issues. How can people follow you and maybe also support you and your daughter moving forward?
Well, first, I just want to thank everyone for the love and the support. It doesn't go unnoticed at all. To me, before, we grew up with a lot of racism out west in Winnipeg, right? And we had to go through a lot of that. And I actually kept my Indigenous regalia off social media for so long until I realized that this is a beautiful culture that survived some of the darkest times in our history. Why am I hiding this? And if I can show our beauty of our culture and change the narrative, which is Indigenous futurism is that we have these gifts that we could change that narrative of the violence that we survived, of the colonial violence and everything like that. And so to me, that is so important, what we do in our work. I don't really see it as power. I see it as, expressing our creativity. And I really take that responsibility serious from Creator, that they gave us gifts and we have to be able to use them and share them with the world, because we're only here for a short time. What are you going to do with your life? Well, I want to have spiritual development. I want to help the world, and I want to give back as much as possible.
And I think you're doing just that. I mean, I've learned so much within this short amount of time from you. I feel like we can continue going on. And I think you should write a book, honestly.
I already got the title. No. No.
Well, thank you so much, Santee, for joining us on the show today. Where can people follow and support everything that you're up to?
You can follow me at Santee Siouxx with the double X, SanteeSiouxx. I just like the way the double X looks. It's so aesthetic looking. I only said that so you remember. But yes, I'm on all social media platforms. And again, thank you for having me on the show, and thank you for listening to me. Piram Ayaye.
Hi. Thank you, hi, for listening to the show. If you like the podcast, check your podcast app now to make sure you're subscribed. I'm Shayla Oulette Stonechild. You can find me along with more info on Matriarch Movement on Instagram at Shayla0H. And my podcast producer is Kattie Laur, and I'll talk to you again soon.